South Australian State Director, Christopher Brohier. It's a joy to have you on the program this morning.
Thanks, Carlos. Great to be here.
Christopher, you have been a part of the ACL team for a while, since 2012. You used to do a fair bit of volunteering for ACL before you came on board as part-time State Director in May in 2018. Can you give us a little bit of background first as we begin today's conversation about the work that ACL is doing, firstly in South Australia?
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, we've got a great little gig going down here. We've got a vibrant team of people, of supporters, really engaged. We had a lovely meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago with Martin at the Greek church in Croydon, in one of the suburbs here in Adelaide. We had about 200 people, and we had the best supper that you could ever imagine, thanks to our brethren in the St. Nectarius Church. And we have regular meetings at our home with people who are interested in getting involved on a deeper level. So we're really developing as a family of believers with a heart for our state, to be engaged for the gospel and for right and good in our society.
That's great.
So
great to hear.
It's a real buzz to be here.
Yeah, wonderful to hear. Christopher, for the benefit of our supporters around the country and those that will hear today's podcast around the nation, can you give us a little bit of insight as to the work that ACL is lobbying for right now in South Australia?
Yeah, well, the big ticket item at the moment is prostitution law reform. We are contending for the Nordic model of prostitution law reform, which, for those who may not know, decriminalizes the conduct of the sellers, provides an exit strategy for largely the women who want to leave, and criminalizes the conduct of the men. Opposed to us is a proposal to completely decriminalize prostitution in South Australia, put forward by the Greens, which would make South Australia the worst in the world, in my view, so far as prostitution law is concerned. Today we have academics flying in from across the country. We have Wendy Francis flying in from Queensland to speak at a parliamentary forum this evening. And for those who are listening, please pray, because we're speaking to parliamentarians about the issue of decriminalisation, but also about the issue of the Nordic model, which we think is the most progressive and most enlightened form of prostitution law reform. So that's the big ticket item. We're also beginning a little work to enhance palliative care rather than euthanasia. And we're beginning a campaign to press for the preservation of life from 24 weeks onward for infants in the womb, and rather than a Greens proposal to completely legalize abortion as it is in Victoria, Tasmania, right up to birth. We have to confront these things directly, but also provide positive alternatives.
That's great. Thank you for giving us that as an insight. Christopher, can I take the conversation to you? Can I ask you a question about you as a man, as a Christian involved in law? Can you, for our listeners, can you give us an insight as to your background in law, your history, and potentially speak about some of the court cases that you are currently perhaps working on and involved in?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home, but as I entered in my teens, I was really more interested in the footy match I'd played or the girls I was going out with than God. I remember sitting in a church and thinking, how could God be here? I started law because my dad had been in the police, was very keen about it. Took a year off and went traveling. I was in Bangladesh, and I met a Christian fellow there who gave me a book to read. It's called Screwtape Letters, written by C.S. Lewis. Letters from a senior devil to a junior devil. And as I read that, I realized I wasn't on God's side, and that really cut me. I went on there to Calcutta in India, and I went to evening service in St. Peter's Cathedral in Calcutta. There were 3 people in the church, the pastor, a lady up the front, and myself.
Wow.
And he spoke from John 14 and said, where Philip says to Jesus, Lord, show us the Father and we shall be satisfied. And Jesus said, have I been with you so long, and yet you do not know me, Philip? He that had seen me had seen the Father. Wow. And the pastor explained that we can grow up in a church, which I had, and know the stories which I did, but we may never have met God. And to meet God, we have to meet Jesus Christ. So right there and then I said, yes, Lord. And I didn't know what I'd done, but as I left the church, I had a sense of peace that I'd never felt before. And I knew it was real because when I got into a bus on the way back to the Salvation Army where I was staying, I thought there was a girl sitting the other side, and I thought to look at her as I would have done before, but I thought, no, I don't want to lose this peace.
Yeah, wow.
That deep sense of reality has never left. Feelings have come up and down. So I came back and continued in law, finished, worked in the country, then worked in the city, and then went to the independent bar about 25 years ago. And been involved in commercial and various sorts of litigation. And in the last 4 or 5 years, with Martin and Jim, we've developed this concept of the Human Rights Law Alliance, representing Christian people who are increasingly feeling under pressure from the forces of secularism. So right now we've got the big case, which we'll talk about in a minute, the Cathy Club Graham Preston case. But right now we're helping a Christian photographer who, because he was approached by someone who he'd known from school, who asked him to take some photos of their family. He said yes. He found out they were in a same-sex relationship, and he said, look, I'll do it, but you better know that I'm a Christian and this is how I think. But if you want me to do it, I'll still do it with skill and professionalism. So she sued him in the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal, and that case is going on, and we're representing him. We're representing Campbell Markham in Tasmania, who was taken before the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal along with the street evangelist David G. And David G had put up a sign saying, children need a mum and a dad in the mall in Hobart, and that was thought offensive. So we took that case on. We've taken it to the Supreme Court. As a result of our strong stand, the complainant has dropped the complaint in the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal.
Yeah, great.
So what we're saying that often there's a bullying aspect to this which needs to be stood up to and faced firmly. That's just sort of where we're going.
Yeah, wow. Christopher, thanks for bringing up the Cathy Club case, and that is a case that I would like us to discuss a little bit further in just a moment. But I want to, before we talk about the Cathy Club court case, I want to ask your opinion because it might not be something that many people around the nation might be aware of. Many people, perhaps of Christian faith, may not really understand, might be skeptical of the fact that maybe Christians today are, I guess, suffering some form of persecution for being Christian, but also that the environment and I guess the landscape of religious freedom in Australia is changing. How have you seen that change throughout your legal history, throughout your legal experience?
Well, let me give you a 2-minute run through Australia. We've talked about the case about the photographer. That's from Perth, so that's Western Australia. The Northern Territory, we've represented a Christian teacher who, during the marriage campaign, put things up on Facebook and faced disciplinary action from his school, and we represented him, and that's been withdrawn. In Queensland, I've helped Dr. David Van Gen, who retweeted, that's all he did, retweeted articles by Miranda Devine and a tweet by Lyle, and he was reported to the medical board, and he had to give an answer. We've helped him with that. In New South Wales, we represented Dr. Patricia Weerakoon, who's a sexologist, a doctor who deals with sexual matters. She spoke at a Christian convention for children from Christian schools and talked about sexuality issues from a Christian point of view. A person who'd been after her really for a long time, even physically had confronted her, reported her to the university, and she had to give was why she shouldn't lose her accreditation. So we represented her and showed them that they were factually wrong, and that was dropped. In Victoria, we have the cases we've spoken of. Tasmania, we have Campbell Markham and others. And in South Australia, the story of Josh Lawless, which is on the ACL website. We represented him when he was subject to disciplinary proceedings from his university. So you could take that quick tour around Australia, and it is a reality. It is now. It is not coming. It is now.
And thank you for giving us that insight, because we can definitely see and understand that things are changing, and things are changing quite rapidly. It's fair to say that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Christopher,
sorry, keep going.
So Christopher, you highlighted Cathy Club, and that is a court case that we at ACL have identified and highlighted to our supporters and to the nation. Because of its significance. The court case was heard in Canberra in the High Court last week. What can you tell us about that court case? And can you give us perhaps a little insight into where proceedings are at and what may happen as a result of the Cathy Club court case?
So let me just lay some foundation, Carlos. The Constitution, the Australian Constitution, mandates what's called representative and responsible democracy. Representative democracy is we choose our parliamentarians.
Yep.
Responsible democracy, they are accountable through Parliament to us. So the High Court has said, because that's part of the Constitution, we have to have a freedom, there's an implied freedom for us, the electors, to talk to our parliamentarians and to talk to each other about political matters, which are broadly defined. Now, the legislation in Victoria and Tasmania says effectively you can't talk about abortion in Victoria in a way that's reasonably likely to cause distress or anxiety, and in Tasmania you can't protest about abortion within 150 meters of an abortion clinic.
Yep.
Abortion is defined as both medical and surgical abortions. So medical abortions can happen in clinics, GPs clinics, where GPs prescribe abortifacient drugs. So we're not just talking about one clinic, we're talking about a number of clinics, the locations of which the governments can't tell us because they don't know. And you can't, and there are these restrictions. So we've argued in the High Court that that's an intense burden and an impermissible burden on the freedom of political communication, because it effectively stops speech, and people don't know where these zones are, so that will stifle or chill the freedom of talk. We were opposed by every state attorney general, the Commonwealth Attorney General, and the Northern Territory Attorney General. So the courtroom number one, if I can paint a picture, is a magnificent courtroom. 7 judges walk in with great solemnity, and it was full of lawyers, probably some of the best constitution lawyers in the country, and there were 5 of us against this massive team.
Yeah, wow.
And we're very grateful for all the prayers and the help that people have offered, and we're conscious that people were praying. And the arguments were put as best we could. And now it's up to the High Court. They have reserved their decision. So that means they'll go away and think about it. And in 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they'll hand down their decision.
So can I ask you, where do you see the rulings landing? What do you see the implications of Cathy's case being? How do you see society perhaps changing as a result of the rulings that might come out of the High Court?
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen because it's up to the judges now. But we argued this case because we thought it's very important, both from the point of view of the importance of freely discussing this controversial issue of abortion in important places to talk about it, in the vicinity of communities. That's an important principle, we believe. But also, there are wider ramifications for the rest of Australia in terms of how this doctrine of the implied freedom of political communication develops. So in December last year, Dr. Bob Brown took a case to the High Court where he challenged the Tasmanian anti-logging protest laws, and he was successful. That's one step along the way. This is another step along the way. And the High Court may say that these laws are bad, and that'll be another increment of freedom. Or they may say these laws are good, and that'll be a rejigging of the freedom. So we believe that in this, I believe that in this society, there's a lot of pressure to stop people talking about things. The more we have the liberty to talk, the better we are as a democracy, because we only grow as we confront and challenge each other. The sense that's coming that you don't talk about this thing because it offends me, that is fundamentally, I think, wrong, but not good for our society.
Yeah, because I think when I've thought about the Cathy Club court case and thinking potentially about what may happen, and you're right, Christopher, that it's in the hands of the judges and we don't really know what's going to happen, but this court case really has, I think, wider implications in that it actually affects what people can talk about and where they can talk about, because it ultimately, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it ultimately sort of hands down the opportunity for governments, for law to actually mandate and dictate what things can be talked about and where, and that would ultimately affect all of society. Am I right in kind of thinking in that regard?
I think there's a measure of truth in that. I think the governments want to restrict this implied freedom doctrine, because that it restricts their power, and the High Court stands between the people, if you like, and the executive, and now the legislature, in keeping things according to the Constitution. So anything that restricts power in the legislature, they might crash, they might throw it about. So that's a big principle. But on a deeper level, the message of Jesus goes out to the mind first. So Christianity is not a command control religion. You say this, do it, or you're in trouble. God says, come now, let us reason together. Jesus came preaching a message. He said, repent, there's something wrong with you. You've got to change. And it's critical for the freedom of the gospel that there be freedom to challenge people's thinking, because the whole essence of the Christian gospel is that we've gone wrong, that we're not great, that we are in fact deeply flawed.
Yeah, and that's a really great distinction to make about the Christian faith, I think, which nicely, I think, leads us into the topic of religious freedom and talking about the Ruddock Review that was handed to federal government back in May this year, and government has kept it, has reviewed it for months, and we at ACL have been waiting for the government to release the findings of such a review. Just a couple of days ago, the recommendations of that review were released around the nation. 20 recommendations made in all kinds of different areas, including education, including what society can and can't do. What do you think about where the Ruddock Review is going? Can I just ask for your insight, perhaps your legal insight as to where you think now, given their recommendations, where do you think the review is at? What can we expect out of it? What are your thoughts around that, Chris?
I've had a chance to look quickly at the recommendations, and they go from high order issues like talking about a Religious Discrimination Act, two fairly detailed issues about how Christian schools or faith schools should operate. How it goes really will depend on the government and the opposition, and the actual response that government comes up with will depend on the amount of communication they get from us. So I think it's very important. We started here a little initiative in Adelaide from about July this year of meeting with pastors, encouraging them to get their people and go with their people to see their local parliamentarians. It's very important now that this keeps happening, that we start communicating directly with our parliamentarians about what we believe should be in this response to the Ruddock review.
And certainly for us to help people communicate with MPs, to not necessarily put pressure on them, but just to let them know that there is a significant grassroots movement around the country that are Christians, that care about religious freedom, but not only us as a grassroots movement, but certainly the estimated 1.8 million Christians that attend church on a monthly basis. What else, given that that we can ask MPs to act on religious freedom, how do you see such a review playing out? What do you expect from it? What do you see may actually come out of it? How will it affect law, if at all?
I think, Carlos, to answer that, I'd like to step back a bit. The Prime Minister said a couple of weeks ago that Australia is a free country, not a secular one. I think we should think on that phrase and burn it into our minds. We are a free country, not a secular one. You will hear the opponents of religious freedom say again and again, Australia is a secular country. That is not correct. We are not founded on the basis of atheism or secularism. We are founded on the basis of freedom. If anything, we are founded on the basis of a Christian heritage. The preamble to our Constitution starts, "We the people of Australia humbly relying on Almighty God." Some of the fundamentals of our Constitution, the concept of representative democracy, the concept of trial by jury, the concept of no appropriation of property without proper compensation, they are rooted in Christian views. They are not rooted in any other views. So I believe that we have to not be apologetic when we approach our parliamentarians. We have to be confidently bold to say that we believe that there must be the freedom to not just to worship, but to practice and live out our beliefs. And the reason for that is this. Religious identity is just as much real and just as much deep-seated as any other identity. In fact, I would argue deeper. There was an article in one of the newspapers, I think last week, which said religious belief is just that, it's only a belief.
That's right.
That shows a fundamental misunderstanding of Christian gospel, because the Christian gospel says that the human heart is dead, the human spirit is dead, but when a person comes to faith, the Spirit of God comes to live in a supernatural way in the human spirit, and you become a new person from the inside out. That is not just an intellectual belief, that is a heart reality.
That's right.
And that is an identity which is deeper than any other identity, I would argue. And so our Constitution says that we're all treated the same. So the identity of a religious believer has to be on the same level as any other identity. And we therefore have the constitutional right to speak into the affairs of our country on the basis of our faith. Those who say the separation of church and state means that we can't speak into issues from a Christian point of view are fundamentally wrong. They're wrong at all. No less the person than Chief Justice French, speaking in 2015, said that people of faith have to be allowed to contribute on the basis of their faith to the issues of the country. He said it could not be otherwise. And you can get that, you can Google that and find that speech. So when we approach our parliamentarians, we mustn't do it on the basis of saying, well, please give us some freedom, we're good guys. No, we have to say, we have a right to live out our faith because that is what our Constitution gives us. And our humanity gives us, and our identity gives us. So that's the first, I think, a very important principle. Secondly, we have to understand in this mixture of rights, because there are different rights at play now in a pluralistic society. The difference between discriminating on the basis of someone's identity and what they want us to do or want you to do. And the best example of that is the Ashes Bakery case recently handed down by the Supreme Court. There, a homosexual man went to Ashes Bakery and asked for a cake saying, support gay marriage with Ernie and Bert on it. The people looked at it, they took the order, took the money, then they said, we can't do this. And they were sued for discrimination. They lost, but won in the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court held that they weren't discriminating on the grounds of that man's sexuality. They would have refused that cake to anybody because the message of the cake was against what they believed, and they couldn't be compelled to say something against their belief. That is a very important distinction. Distinction between supporting an activity and discriminating on the ground of what a person is. And if that thought had developed properly, I believe some of the decisions in Australia may have been different. So that's a second issue that we should be thinking about and bringing to the attention of our parliamentarians, so that we have the right to live out what we believe, because this is fundamental to the proclamation of Christian truth. You have two opposing camps now. One camp says, everything that comes out of my heart is good, and therefore, if you challenge me on the ground of my behavior, you are wrong, and you can't do that. The gospel camp says, out of the heart of man come evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, and therefore everything that comes out of our hearts is not good. It has to be changed. So the proclamation of the gospel requires this, and we have to stand strong to hold the doors open for the gospel, because ultimately the good of Australia depends on the proclamation of the gospel.
And Christopher, I guess until we see whatever happens with the review, if law was to change, I love what you said, that as Christians living in a free society, that we not only have the right to worship, but we have the right to communicate and the right to continue to live out our faith as what Christ basically instructs or leads us to do as people of faith, and may we continue to do so. I think until such a time where we might not be able to.
Yeah, that's right. And a friend of mine said everybody has the right to be a martyr. So we won't change. We will keep speaking the truth, and whatever happens with the law happens with the law.
Yeah. We
believe at ACL believe that it's important that the law allows for the freedom to preach, and that implies freedom to preach for the Christian gospel and for other messages. But if that changes in the end, we will not change.
That's right. Christopher, as we begin to wrap up today, can I get your thoughts on Queensland and on the Jackie Trad abortion bill that is in front of Queensland Parliament? The Queensland Parliament begin to debate that bill today. It is expected that there'll be a vote at some point this week, perhaps Thursday. Can I get your insights finally into the bill, how abortion laws will change in Queensland, and what are the implications of such a bill Many have called this bill Australia's, if not the world's, most extreme abortion laws. What can you tell us about that?
I think we need to be very, very, very clear about what's involved. Abortion to birth will be legal in Queensland. And if you think about that, at 38 weeks, or 34 weeks rather, gestation, the baby is a baby, fully formed, fully operative. It's just got to come out, can be taken out by a Caesar section and live. Now, once the baby is born, you can't destroy it. That's murder. So you figure out how it's done. Sex selection abortion will happen. So we have to be very clear that this is destruction of life. There is no other alternative to think. And we would urge the parliamentarians to think seriously about that, to think what it is. Abortion is a term, but the procedure doesn't bear thinking about. If it's a 16-week infant in the womb, either through suction curette or forceps, you suction out the limbs, or you crush the skull and pull it out. That's what happens. It is awful to see. One of the most confronting things I've seen is a video of an actual abortion. It is distressing. One of the clients I represented in Victoria was outside an abortion clinic showing pictures of an aborted fetus, and she was charged and convicted of showing obscene material. Why was it obscene? If it was an appendicitis, it wouldn't have been thought of obscene. It was obscene because we are distressed by seeing a bloody infant. That is what it is. And we can't back away from that. And we must pray, and for those in Queensland, keep in touch with your MPs, urging them not to go this way.
Chris, go well. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in South Australia. May God continue to bless you and the team down there. And thank you for your time.